Most people believe their financial stress comes from insufficient income. The assumption is simple and widely accepted. If earnings were higher, pressure would disappear. Bills would feel lighter, decisions would become easier, and financial anxiety would eventually fade. This belief is repeated so often that it feels self-evident. It is not. For most households, persistent financial stress is not the result of low income. It is the result of living without margin. Income determines how much money flows in. Margin determines how much stability exists when that flow is interrupted. Those two concepts are not the same, and confusing them leads to years of frustration. Margin is the distance between ordinary life and financial disruption. It is the difference between an inconvenience and a crisis. When margin is thin, even small disruptions force immediate decisions. When margin is adequate, the same disruptions are absorbed quietly and without urgency. This distinction matters because urgency changes behavior, and behavior determines outcomes. According to data published by the U.S. Federal Reserve, a majority of adults report that they would struggle to cover an unexpected expense of approximately $400 without borrowing, selling possessions, or delaying other obligations. This group includes individuals who are employed full-time, individuals with higher education, and individuals who outwardly appear financially stable. On paper, many are not poor. In practice, they are operating without meaningful margin. Operating without margin produces a specific psychological environment. Financial decisions are not evaluated based on long-term cost or strategic value. They are evaluated based on immediacy. The primary question becomes whether a problem can be resolved quickly, not whether it is resolved efficiently. Behavioral economists describe this state as scarcity-driven cognition. When resources feel constrained, mental bandwidth narrows. Attention shifts toward immediate threats. Long-term planning becomes more difficult. Risk tolerance changes. Impulse control weakens, not because of character flaws, but because cognitive resources are occupied. This is not speculation. Controlled studies have shown that individuals placed under conditions of perceived scarcity perform worse on problem-solving tasks, even when their underlying ability remains unchanged. The same person placed under different conditions makes better decisions simply because the sense of urgency has been removed. Financial margin functions as a buffer against this cognitive narrowing. It reduces the frequency with which urgent decisions are required. Fewer urgent decisions lead to fewer costly compromises. The absence of margin does not usually result from catastrophic mistakes. It results from gradual normalization of fragility. Modern financial systems are structured in a way that makes fragility feel normal. Payments are automated. Expenses are fragmented into small recurring charges. Credit smooths consumption and delays pain. The result is a lifestyle that appears manageable until a disruption occurs. At that point, the structure reveals itself. Fees are triggered by timing mismatches rather than recklessness. Interest accrues not because of extravagance, but because of short-term necessity. According to public banking disclosures, overdraft and related fees alone have generated billions of dollars annually in revenue for financial institutions in the United States, largely from customers who are not insolvent but operating close to zero. Interest revenue follows the same pattern. Average credit card interest rates now exceed 20%, with many accounts charging substantially more. These rates are not applied selectively to irresponsible consumers. They are applied to anyone carrying a balance, regardless of how that balance originated. A medical bill, a car repair, or a temporary income interruption is sufficient. The system does not require failure. It requires proximity to failure. Individuals operating near the edge are predictable. Predictability is profitable. When urgency is present, price sensitivity declines. When pressure is high, negotiation decreases. When stress is persistent, convenience is prioritized over cost. This is not a moral judgment, it is an incentive structure. Financial institutions, service providers, and subscription-based businesses benefit from consumers who remain engaged but constrained. Complete collapse is undesirable. Stability with margin reduces fee generation. The most profitable position is continuous partial strain. For the individual, partial strain feels survivable, which is why it persists. Bills are paid, life continues. Stress becomes ambient rather than acute. Over time, the absence of margin is no longer perceived as a problem. It becomes the baseline. This normalization is one of the most significant obstacles to financial improvement. When stress is constant, it becomes invisible. People adapt to it in the same way they adapt to background noise. Only when it is removed does its presence become obvious. The goal of building margin is not wealth accumulation in the abstract, it is stress removal in the concrete. Once margin exists, several changes occur simultaneously. First, financial decisions slow down. Without urgency, individuals can wait. Waiting allows comparison. Comparison improves outcomes. This applies to borrowing terms, purchasing timing, employment negotiations, and investment choices. Second, error rates decline. Many financial losses occur not because of ignorance, but because decisions are made under pressure. Removing pressure reduces costly mistakes. Third, optionality increases. Optionality is the ability to refuse unfavorable conditions without immediate consequence. This ability is rarely discussed, but it is one of the most valuable financial assets an individual can possess. Two people with identical incomes can experience entirely different financial trajectories solely based on the presence or absence of optionality. Consider employment. An individual without margin must accept unfavorable conditions to maintain income continuity. An individual with margin can tolerate temporary disruption in exchange for better long-term positioning. Over time, this difference compounds into divergent career paths. This principle applies to housing, transportation, education, and entrepreneurship. Margin changes the power dynamic. This is why focusing exclusively on income growth often produces disappointing results. Income can increase without improving stability if expenses and obligations expand concurrently. Lifestyle inflation absorbs gains and preserves fragility. Without intentional margin creation, higher income simply raises the baseline cost of survival. This is not an argument against income growth, it is an argument against missequencing. Liquidity precedes leverage, stability precedes optimization. In personal finance discourse, investment returns are often emphasized early. Compound growth is highlighted. Market participation is framed as urgent. While these concepts are valid, they assume a stable foundation. Volatility at the market level is tolerable when household volatility is low. The reverse is not true. A market downturn may delay wealth accumulation. A household emergency without margin alters behavior, sometimes permanently. Debt incurred under stress carries psychological and financial consequences that extend beyond the original event. This asymmetry explains why early financial progress is often slow. The first gains are not visible on charts. They appear as reduced anxiety, improved sleep, and fewer urgent decisions. These outcomes are difficult to quantify but profoundly influential. Research on financial well-being consistently shows that subjective stress declines sharply once individuals reach a modest level of emergency liquidity. Beyond that point, additional income produces diminishing improvements in perceived security. This suggests that the most impactful financial milestone is not wealth, but resilience. Resilience allows individuals to engage with financial systems on more favorable terms. It reduces dependence on high-cost credit. It increases bargaining power. It permits strategic risk rather than forced risk. The process of building margin is often misunderstood. It is not hoarding, it is not avoidance of opportunity, it is deliberate insulation. Insulation does not eliminate exposure, it moderates it. Households with margins still experience disruptions. The difference is that disruptions do not dictate outcomes. This distinction becomes especially important during periods of economic uncertainty. External shocks disproportionately harm those operating without buffers. Those with margin experience inconvenience rather than collapse. The long-term effects of repeated financial stress are not limited to finances. Chronic stress affects health, relationships, and decision-making capacity. Financial margin indirectly supports well-being across multiple domains by reducing baseline pressure. It also alters self-perception. Individuals who experience control over financial outcomes develop greater confidence in decision-making. This confidence feeds back into behavior, reinforcing positive cycles. By contrast, repeated exposure to financial strain can produce learned helplessness. Individuals begin to believe that outcomes are largely outside their control, reducing initiative even when opportunities arise. Margin interrupts this dynamic. It creates space for agency. Over time, this space allows individuals to engage in higher-order planning. Career transitions, skill development, and long-term investments require tolerance for delayed payoff. Without margin, delayed payoff feels unsafe. With margin, it becomes feasible.
This is why financial advice that ignores psychological context often fails. Behavior does not change in a vacuum. It changes when conditions allow it. Discipline is easier when stress is lower. Planning is easier when urgency is reduced. Patience is easier when survival is not constantly in question. The presence of margin does not guarantee success. It does not eliminate risk. It does not produce wealth automatically. What it does is remove the most expensive constraint: constant pressure. Pressure taxes every decision. It extracts value quietly and continuously. Removing that tax produces returns that are not easily measured but are consistently observed. Eventually, individuals with margin find that money begins to function differently. It is no longer experienced primarily as a source of anxiety. It becomes a tool for managing uncertainty. This shift does not occur dramatically. There is no moment of revelation. It occurs gradually, as urgent problems stop appearing and choices stop feeling forced. Over time, this new baseline becomes normal. At that point, financial progress accelerates, not because effort increases, but because friction decreases. The most significant financial advantage is not superior intelligence or access to information. It is the ability to make decisions without desperation. That ability is purchased through margin, and margin, once established, protects itself.